People surrounding a classic horror star are being killed like our old films. Is someone getting a star turn in murder? We're talking vampires.
Mummies.
And naughty Colin in this episode of
Welcome to Midsomer.
It's that time again.
Hello, and welcome to Midsomer, the podcast where we dissect all the mysteries, the murders, and the many weird things about the long-running hit TV show, Midsomer Murders. I'm your host, Eric Buscher, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Eileen Becker. Hi, Eileen.
Hey, Eric. Today we're talking about Death and the Divas, the fourth episode of the 15th series. It originally aired January 2nd, 2013, and was directed by Nick Lafland and written by Rachel Cooperman and Sally Griffith. Let's sink our teeth into it.
Spoiler warning, we will be discussing the events of this episode, including the identity of the murderer. So if you haven't watched it yet and don't want to know who done it, pause this and go watch it. We'll still be here when you get back.
Thirst for blood. Ah, this is the film Kate and I saw tonight.
Sounds like some trashy vampire film.
Yeah, less of the trashy, please, Jones.
We open way back in Victorian times as a beautiful young woman is picked up by an older gentleman in a horse-drawn carriage. Things seem fine until the gentleman is revealed to be a vampire, and we discover it's actually an old horror film starring scream queen Stella Harris. Watching the film is writer Eve Lomax, who doesn't get to see the ending because someone breaks in and ends her, trashing her cottage and stealing her laptop and her manuscript. Meanwhile, DSI John Barnaby and his wife Sarah attend the very first Midsomer Langley Stella Harris Film Festival. Harris is a hometown girl who made some classic Hammer-esque horror movies in the 60s before quitting the business. She's also Barnaby's movie crush. Everyone watches the same vampire film from before, but Stella's entrance at the festival is overshadowed by the entrance of her much more famous sister, superstar actress Diana Davenport, along with her producer husband Cy. Things get even more awkward when they are reunited with their son Scott, who had fled his father and Hollywood for the quiet country farm life. Barnaby runs into coroner Dr. Kate Wilding, who is also attending the festival, and both of them are called to the murder scene by Jones. The crime scene is just across the way from the festival. A lucky coincidence. Or is it? Wilding finds 2 puncture wounds on Eve's neck, very similar to a vampire bite. Eve's body was found by her landlord, Patrick Tillman, who claims he was there to fix the hot water, but detectives aren't buying it. His wife, Juliet, also doesn't trust Patrick, especially since he doesn't tell her about the murder at all. Juliet runs the local organic vegetable business and works with Scott, as well as Stella's daughter, Emma, and her sexy boyfriend, Perry Stevens. Juliet and Perry have some kind of shady business going on. Diana tries to reconcile with Stella, but Stella recognizes her heartfelt speech from one of her sister's film roles. Stella never forgave Diana for seducing Cy and stealing her big film breakthrough. Diana has spent 4 decades away from Midsomer Langley, not even returning for the deaths of their mother or Stella's husband. Barnaby gets to question his crush, finding out that Stella and Eve had been working together on a book about Stella, but there had been a falling out. Festival organizer and Stella superfan Colin admits to the detectives that he had also been helping Eve with her book, but he was upset that she stole a rare 70s photograph of Stella. Emma admits that she had been school friends with Eve, but had fallen out of touch until she came to Midsomer Langley. She also says that Patrick has been annoying Eve for dates, but Eve was seeing someone. Diana and Cy have rented out a large estate from Patrick where they host a big party that everyone attends. Colin recognizes Perry from his past and suggests they hang out sometime. Patrick tries to get Diana to make an offer on the estate, but she says she won't be staying. Cy has demanded that Diana return to the States immediately, and he tries to intimidate Scott to come back as well. Barnaby also learns that Cy had filed an injunction against Eve's book, made multiple phone calls to her, and his fancy Jaguar had been seen at her house. He's looking like a huge jerk, and a pretty good suspect, until someone stabs him in the back at his own party, and he falls over the upstairs banister to his death. It's a scene reminiscent of another Harris film, one that Cy himself had worked as the stuntman for. You would think he would know how to survive the fall.
You would think so.
Now, for listeners who might be noticing a slight difference in the audio quality of Eileen's and mine's voices, We are both suffering from allergies, and myself, I am recovering from a small bout of COVID. So I apologize for the creakiness of my usually velvety pipes.
Speaking of velvety pipes, we have a new detective, don't we?
We do. This is our first John Barnaby episode. Neil Dudgeon replaced John Nettles as the Detective Barnaby in this series. Fun facts about Dudgeon. He hails from Dorchester in the Yorkshire region. He started acting in school plays and studied drama at the University of Bristol. His first screen credit was the Gary Oldman, Albert Molina film Prick Up Your Ears in 1987. He had a long and steady career, and he's appeared in things like Lovejoy, Inspector Morse, the Mrs. Bradley Mysteries, Bridget Jones' The Edge of Reason, and the Messiah miniseries. He made his first Midsomer appearance in the season 4 episode Garden of Death, where he thought he was God's gift to women. In 2010, when Nettles wanted to retire, Dudgeon was brought in to play his cousin, DCI John Barnaby. This keeps the detecting in the Barnaby family, as also causes less confusions in areas of the world where the show is not known as Midsomer Murders. It's called Inspector Barnaby.
Well, that makes sense then, that they would want to keep things in the family.
I always thought it was a little weird.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, is that how it works? Oh, my brother's a detective. Yay.
This isn't Jersey.
So let's talk about John Barnaby. You know, Dudgeon comes in as the star, and there is definitely a tone shift to the series a bit. Like, Eileen, what do you see as sort of some of the differences between the two? What does Dudgeon and John Barnaby bring to the series?
Well, for me, Tom was always very grounded and very skeptical of everything. However, because of his psychology background, John Barnaby brings more of that to his detection. He still does the traditional detecting work, but he gets more into everyone's head to understand what they're doing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel that the way that Tom Barnaby, I feel that he was subtly more sarcastic than John. John is much more sarcastic, and I don't know. You feel there's a certain sense of cockiness to John that I feel that isn't there in the Nettles.
Yeah.
I think that there's a couple. I think the show gets a little sexier. I do feel that like there's a bit more. I think it gets a little less bloody, but it gets a little weirder, and it gets a little sexier. You know, John and his wife Sarah have an active sex life.
Yes, you get that much more. It's referenced a bit in the earlier episodes between Tom and Joyce, but not always in a positive way. Here it is implied that things are very good sexually between them, that there's a trust there.
I also feel like there's an interesting thing I've noticed is that when Nettles was like the Nettles solutions were generally that very classic. Here, I'm going to gather everybody in the same room, and we're going to reveal who done it. And I've noticed there's a much more common thing with the John Barnaby character is the solution tends to be revealed as he is attempting to stop the murderer from committing another murder.
Yes, and that's where the psychology comes in, because he has to talk them down in a way.
Yeah, he does. That happens a lot. It's a John Barnaby trope that we will see. We see it a bit in this episode, and we see it in many episodes. One thing I will say is I feel that Tom is slightly warmer. I think is a slightly warmer character. I think there's something about maybe in the Nettles performance, or maybe this the way they wrote the characters. Tom feels like a slightly warmer family man, and whereas John becomes a family man over the course of the start, he's just sort of like, I don't know. I don't get the same warm fuzzies from John Barnaby that I get from Tom.
Tom was more of an everyman. You understood his thought processes, I think, more than you do with John, because John is, again, bringing in more of that psychology background. Tom, you see how he's going about things, except when he makes those strange magical deductions that happen on occasion that advance the plot. But there's a understanding of humanity in him that is a little more base level. This is my life I have lived, and this is how I understand people. Where John is, I understand people because I've studied this. And I think that's where there's a bit of the warmth that you get from Tom, is because of it's more of a lived experience than with John. You get that warmth of experience from John eventually as he becomes more of a family man, as you said. You get more interaction with Sarah. Betty comes along and really loosens him up, I think, a lot.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Shall we stop in and get some little bit of tourist info?
Very little, because this is the only appearance of Midsomer Langley in the series. So basically they have a Stella Harris Film Society.
Well, they had a film society.
They have a film society.
Yeah.
Yes. Though the guy who was running it dies. But it's a very traditional Midsomer village with a village green. It's very quaint. It's got a big old house on the outskirts of town that is up for rent, apparently, because whoever lived there before no longer does. But it's your typical Midsomer village.
Yep, and if this is the only, as long as this remains its only appearance, it has one of the lowest crime rates in all of Midsomer.
That is true.
Let's get into some cast highlights. There's a lot of great cast in this episode.
This is a very cast-driven episode for me. And we start with Sinead Cusack, who plays Stella Harris. And she comes from the Irish Cusack acting family, which is unrelated, as far as I can tell, to the American Cusack family. John and Joan Cusack. She is the daughter of Maureen Cusack and Cyril Cusack, both acclaimed stage and screen actors in Ireland. Her sister Sorcha will be familiar to fans of Father Brown, as she plays the housekeeper and parish secretary, Mrs. McCarthy. Another sister, Neve, has appeared on a number of shows, including the Midsomer episode Days of Misrule. And I just watched her last night in a Poirot episode, and she looks a lot like her sister. Her brother, Patrick, is also in the business as an actor and director. Sinead has worked steadily since 1967 and has won and been nominated for many prestigious theater awards. She's had film roles in movies as diverse as the last remake of Beau Geste and V for Vendetta, and has appeared in many Shakespeare plays adapted for television. She's been married to actor Jeremy Irons since 1978 and is the mother of actor Max Irons. She also had a son prior to her marriage, which she gave up for adoption, and he grew up to be Irish politician Richard Boyd Barrett.
I think Sinead did a really good job in this episode.
She's amazing, yeah.
The kind of the scenes where she was talks about sort of what she's gone through with her daughter and everything like that. The fights she does with her sister, I thought they were the heart to heart that they have at the end. I think it was really just some top notch acting.
Mm-hmm. She is one of those actors that really stands out in the canon of guest actors on Midsomer Murders, along with Harriet Walter, who we'll talk about in a little bit.
Playing Cy Davenport is Henry Goodman, who I thought was American, and turns out he's British. He's been an active actor since 1972. In 2013, the same year he guest starred in Midsomer, he also appeared in Yes, Prime Minister as Sir Humphrey Appleby. People who are big fans of the Marvel Cinematic Universe will recognize him as the evil Hydra scientist Dr. List, who appeared in one of the Avengers films and in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Ooh. Perry Stevens is played by Samuel Anderson. His first film role was as Crowther in The History Boys, but Doctor Who fans will recognize him as Danny Pink, the math teacher who's the love interest of companion Clara Oswald. He also appeared in Death in Paradise, Father Brown, the final series of DCI Banks, and the Netflix show Another Life.
Pierce Quigley plays naughty Colin Yule. He's been active since 1989, appearing in Inspector Morse, Pie in the Sky, Queer as Folk, and the Wheel of Time series that just was on Amazon. He's performed in a number of Shakespeare's Globe film productions, including Sir John Falstaff in The Merry Wives of Windsor, and he played Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream. So, of course, insert your naughty Colin joke there. And doing a fun cameo as the evil priestess seen for just like 2 seconds in The Mummy Rises was Carolyn Munro, who was the star of a number of Hammer horror films, including Dracula AD 1972. She went on to appear in the classic Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter. And then, The Spy Who Loved Me with Roger Moore, Star Crash, and The Last Horror Film. She does still work, but this appearance in Midsomer was her most recent TV appearance.
Next, we have our village star, Harriet Walter, who plays Diana Davenport. She also comes from an acting family, as her uncle is Christopher Lee, who played Count Dracula in 7 films for Hammer Film Studios, making him one of the greatest actors of the horror genre. Harriet has worked throughout her career with the Royal Shakespeare Company, as well as appearing on the big screen in the 1995 film version of Sense and Sensibility, Babel, Rocketman, and The Last Duel. On TV, she has appeared in numerous series, most notably in Downton Abbey, The Crown, Succession, The Spanish Princess, Killing Eve, Doctor Who, and Ted Lasso. She appeared in the previous Midsomer episode, Orcus Fatalis, as well. She's been nominated for numerous awards and has won an Olivier Award. While always a great actress, she seems to be hitting her stride lately, especially with these guest stars on these really prestigious TV series. She seems to be everywhere nowadays, and very welcome so. And a fun fact about her great-great-great-grandfather was the founder of the Times newspaper.
Yeah, I mean, she's also great in this. There's a good meat on the bone for her on this role.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it's interesting. It's another kind of toxic mother that she's lately. I see her in sort of Succession, where she plays the toxic mom. Ted Lasso, where she plays the toxic mom.
Yeah.
Even Sense and Sensibility, which I rewatched recently, and she's sort of a toxic mom in that.
And The Spanish Princess and
Last Duel.
The Last Duel. Yeah, she falls into that category, but she does it so well because she adds a lot of depth to that sort of character.
Exactly.
It's usually a very one note, and she brings a lot to it.
Yep. And then we have one more return visitor, Anna Wilson-Jones, who plays Emma Harris. She appeared in the 2005 episode Bantling Boy. She's also appeared in numerous TV series, including Inspector Morse, Rosemary and Thyme, Hotel Babylon, Black Mirror, the notorious first episode where she played the Prime Minister's wife. She also did 2 episodes of Succession, and Agatha Raisin and Grantchester. Another actress who gets a better second half, I think, than a first half in this episode.
Yeah, she really brings it at the end on this one. Those final scenes, she really shows her chops.
Yeah, well, they had to kill off a few actors before they could really give her some scenes.
That is true.
I think let's kind of like jumping sort of right into there's another film festival. How many film festivals does the Midsomer? I mean, okay, this one's pretty specific.
At least there's no erotica section.
The one thing I was like, they pointed out, we were hoping to make this annual. It's like, she's in 4 films.
One a year.
It's like even if you do like 4, like, well, it's a day. Because I mean, they're 60s horror films, so they're probably like an hour and a half at best.
Yeah.
So like that's like an afternoon, evening movie marathon. But also, did they just not have streaming there yet? Is like the Wi-Fi in Midsomer just bad enough that like like all those DVDs everywhere?
It was 2013, so it was before streaming was
slightly before
everywhere, yeah. But still, yeah.
I know I'm being massively unfair. It was just And then, of course, John's sort of fan obsession with Stella Harris.
We can get into that a little bit later because I think there are a lot of parallels with the X-Men Cometh and Tom's
Yeah.
fandom with the X-Man.
You know, a lot of this centers around the '60s horror film genre. So we're going to take a quick detour to Eileen's History Corner to talk about Hammer films.
Yeah. It's no secret that they're really drawing on the Hammer films genre in this episode. You see the movie posters, especially at Colin's place. The clips that they show of the movies are very Hammer-esque. So let's talk about who Hammer films were and when they were started. They were founded in London in 1934 by comedian William Hines, whose stage name was Will Hammer, and he took that from the London area of Hammersmith where he lived. Their first film was The Public Life of Henry IX, which is a playful tribute to the Oscar-nominated British film The Private Life of Henry VIII. The next 4 films were The Bank Messenger Mystery, The Mystery of the Mary Celeste, which featured Bela Lugosi, Song of Freedom, which featured Paul Robeson, and Sporting Love. After that, the company went bankrupt. But it was owned by somebody else, so the studio that owned it revived it after World War II in order to supply quick, cheap films to British movie houses. They started with horror films in 1955 with the Quatermass experiment, and you do see Quatermass posters at Colin's house. This was followed by The Curse of Frankenstein in 1957, Dracula and the Revenge of Frankenstein in 1958, and The Hound of the Baskervilles and The Mummy in 1959. From 1960 to 1979, they made 39 more horror films, as well as such prehistoric adventure films as She, starring Ursula Andress, 1 Million Years BC, starring Raquel Welch in a fur bikini, The Lost Continent, and When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth. The last Hammer film until 2008 was 1979's The Lady Vanishes, starring Elliot Gould and Sybil Shepherd, which apparently got terrible reviews. As Hollywood codes became looser in the 60s, however, sex and blood became more commonplace in mainstream films. Hammer's box office dropped drastically, and it went into liquidation in 1979. It just couldn't compete with movies like Bonnie and Clyde and The Wild Bunch with their more stylistic and expertly staged depictions of violence. And The Night of the Living Dead in 1968 really brought a new standard for horror films. They played up the sex in their movies, but actresses such as Carolyn Monroe refused roles that required nudity. Still, in their heyday, they employed many actors who are considered horror and science fiction film royalty, including Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Veronica Carlson, Michael Ripper, and Barbara Shelley. Oliver Reed's career was launched with powerful performances in The Curse of the Werewolf and other Hammer films, and Darth Vader himself, David Prowse, starred as Frankenstein's monster in several films. Now, in 2007, Hammer Films was purchased by a Dutch producer who not only bought the rights to over 300 films, but also planned to restart the studio. In 2008, they released their first film, Beyond the Rave. In 2010, they released the critically acclaimed Let Me In, a remake of the Swedish horror film Let the Right One In. Their adaptation of the modern horror classic The Woman in Black was released in 2012, starring Harry Potter himself, Daniel Radcliffe. Their latest release to date is 2019's The Lodge, starring Alicia Silverstone, Richard Armitage, and Elvis Presley's granddaughter, Riley Keough.
Yeah, they were really the Blumhouse of their day.
Yeah.
The Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing Dracula films are at least the first couple are really fun and kind of classic, 60s horror, 50s and 60s horror films.
Yeah.
And of course, like that 1 Million Years BC is iconic because of Raquel Welch.
Yeah. And it's referenced in that bikini that
Yep.
Stella Harris character wears in that photograph. What's funny is that as they were getting worse and worse and they kept cranking out these sequels, even Christopher Lee was like, look, let's just stop. These are getting really bad.
Yeah. I thought the films that they had, the Stella Harris films they were showing throughout the episode were kind kind of fun that they, the playful bad, of course, when the vampire, every time the vampire fangs come out and it's clearly someone's underneath it, like just turning on a green light.
Yeah. Yeah. Hammer films are not known for their huge production budgets, but they were at the forefront of that second wave of horror films after the Universal early 1930s horror films. This was definitely the second wave of them, and Hammer really was at the forefront of that.
And they launched Christopher Lee, who, had a tremendous career, both in these kind of low budget horror films, but he went on to be, in like Lord of the Rings. He is an iconic actor with that voice. He's also in the Star Wars films. He's Count Dooku.
Yeah.
One of the worst named bad guys I've ever heard.
And Peter Cushing and David Prowse were also in Star Wars. So
yeah.
There would be no Star Wars without Hammer films.
Exactly. I liked the film credit says for the one where we see like Cy is the monster and the credit says monster Cy Davenport. I'm like, yeah, that checks out. He's kind of a jerk.
Yep. Very apt description.
We had a lot of strange kills in this episode. This is a strange kill overload, somewhat. Mm-hmm. So you had someone murdered, but then it looked like a vampire bite.
Mm-hmm.
Mummified. And then, the Cy Bannister getting stabbed in the back, and then he falls over the banister to his death. So I get like, okay, you kill somebody, you put a little fork in them, looks like a vampire bite. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You suffocate someone, make it and put them in mummy wrap. Okay. Like, there's no way you could literally have like stabbed Cy knowing that he would walk to the banister and fall over to his, like, there's just, you'd have to kind of like stab him and then give him a push.
I assume that's what happened. Let's just propel him on his way to that banister.
By the way, there's a weird thing. So he falls, right? He comes to the banister, his belly's to the banister, and he falls face over, flips over. So as you could literally see him as he's coming down to the ground, his back is going to come to the ground.
Yeah. And
then when you see the body land, he's on his stomach.
Yeah.
Like,
it's like a cat. He always lands on his stomach.
It was almost just like, okay, look, I think if somebody was like, oh, wait, if he lands that way, then the knife is going to explode through his chest, and that might be too violent even for Midsomer. But it's just like, it's like almost like, oh, I gotta leave a pretty corpse. Flip.
Yeah, no, you seem to fall on a bit on his head, so I'm not sure how pretty that corpse is going to be.
Like, for this first half, I think it sets up a nice mystery. It sets up the relationships really well. But I think it does sort of, like most of this episode, it just really seems to, the energy really seems to come from the Stella-Diana fights.
Yeah. Their interaction is very natural and good, and you can tell that these are two actresses who are at the top of their game, even though they're in a TV show,
They're not phoning it in.
Show. They're not phoning it in, no.
Yeah.
Who do you think you are?
Mum, please stop.
Coming back here, acting the big star, living this ridiculous house. You stole my career. Now you want my life as well. Do you want to try that line again, darling? This time with a bit more feeling.
I just feel like, yeah, they brought their A game. Every time they were on, I wanted a little more. But I also really enjoyed Colin.
Colin? Naughty Colin.
It's Colin. You remember? Naughty Colin.
It's just, he also had a fun energy, but sadly, another case of a LGBTQ character in Midsomer, not quite making it to the end.
Yeah. It's also a good Jones episode, and I think Kate gets some nice. Kate Wilding, the new coroner, gets some nice.
Yeah. Let's do a quick coroner before we hit to the halfway mark. So this is the first time we meet Kate Wilding. She is the coroner that replaces Bullard. She appears in seasons 14 through 17, played by Tamsin Mailson. I found an interview with Barry Jackson after his dismissal, where he very bluntly says that he was let go from Midsomer for no real reason that he knows of, other than they wanted to make this show a little more sexy. So they bring in a younger, prettier coroner. He seemed quite bitter. Mailson, Mailson brings a nice energy to the role. She obviously, there's a bit of a relationship that develops between her and Jones over the course. But, I don't think we get to quite bond with her in the way that we sort of bonded with Bullard.
No, I think there's a bit of a lag between Bullard and Fleur, where you see a bunch of coroners and they're good, but they don't stand out really.
Yeah, and they don't stick around.
Yeah.
For Mailson, just to give her career some more context, before Midsomer, she starred in the show Teachers with Andrew Lincoln and Bodies with Keith Allen. Now, Allen and Mailson are currently in a relationship and have been for a very long time. They have a daughter together. They own a restaurant together, a small cafe, which might explain why she's not really done a lot since leaving Midsomer. She's appeared in the first season of the show Unforgotten. She appeared in the second season of the show Marcella, appearing with Keith Allen, and she's in the 2021 film La Cha-Cha, which is directed by Allen's brother.
Keeping it in the family.
That's all she's done since leaving Midsomer.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe she likes the restaurant business.
Maybe she just wants to be, spend more time with her kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break here, and then we're going to come back with the second half right after this. And we're back. Let's get to the second half of Death and the Divas.
Excuse me, sit down, please. I haven't finished yet.
You said my sister was not under arrest. So far as I'm aware, neither am I.
After Sai's death, Stella admits to Barnaby what we already know. She hates her sister for stealing her career. But it's been a long time for her to hold a vendetta to still want to kill Diana or Sai. The police find a pair of Diana's undies at Colin's place, and he admits he stole them at the party. Oh, Colin. He tells Stella he's planning to take over Eve's book, and Stella threatens him. Stella and Diana have another row, this time in front of the police, but Barnaby notices that the sisters really enjoy their fights. It's Emma who is torn up by them. Naughty Colin calls Perry, attempting to arrange a visit by promising not to tell people about their past. As he watches another Stella Harris film, The Mummy Rises, someone breaks into his home and murders him, wrapping him like the mummy from the film. Barnaby suspects the killer might be replicating the horror films for a personal reason, or maybe they're just nuts. The detective finds the missing photograph at Eve's house. It's a publicity shot of Stella from an unmade film. Barnaby shows it to Stella, who can't remember when it was taken, even with a large 1970 written on the back of the photo. Meanwhile, Jones trails Perry and finds out he's not just delivering produce, he's delivering some meat with the veg and continuing his former male escort business. Jones is more than a little worried when Perry delivers a box to Sarah. Barnaby tries to guess the killer's next move while Emma gets into a mysterious car accident. Her brakes have been cut, much like another Stella Harris film. Using intense deductive methods called looking things up on the internet and basic math, Barnaby figures out that Emma isn't Stella's kid, she's Diana's. In the interrogation room, the two tell the whole story. Diana was pregnant out of wedlock, and their forceful mother came up with the plan to give the baby to Stella and her husband to raise as their own, to save Diana from the shame. Stella finally tells Emma the truth when she sits in her hospital bed. Through tears, Emma forgives her. Later, Emma checks herself out of the hospital and goes for a drive with Diana. Barnaby knows the killer is still out there, but they are out of Stella films, except for that one that Diana stole when someone gets entombed. Oh, crap! Barnaby and Jones race to the estate that happens to have a big church on its grounds. Stella also understands that something is wrong, and she runs to the church. She discovers the reveal. Emma is the killer, exacting revenge against the people that would have hurt her true mother, Stella. Emma stabs Diana and leaves both sisters locked in the basement of the church. The sisters have a heart-to-heart and recognize that Stella would never have been the star Diana was. She just didn't have it in her to screw over her sister and abandon her child like that. I believe that's called humanity. Barnaby shows up and solves everything. He tries to get Emma to reveal where the key is, but she won't admit it verbally. However, her eyes can't keep from looking at the baptismal font where she dropped the key. The sisters are freed, and Emma is taken into custody.
The end.
The end. And Barnaby and Jones walk off into the sunset.
Discussing the Matrix.
Yeah. So, what do we think about the killer's motivations and methods here?
The motivation, it's always hard to judge a motivation because people kill over the most ridiculous things, but they do go to the long held vendetta thing many, many times, and they do that in this one. It always, for me, doesn't quite come across as working as far as a motivation, but, well, at least the first one, I guess, was to shut up the writer and keep her from revealing that.
Yeah, I think, again, it seems like this is an elaborate. For some of it, it just also seems like these are things that would have had to have been planned out on some level.
Yeah.
But a lot of stuff seemed to be based on convenience. For example, okay, the first one, well, we knew she was there, what she was doing, so she gets murdered. Mm-hmm. But then, was she expecting Diana and Cy to come over?
I don't think they were expecting them. They seemed very surprised when Diana and Cy showed up to the film.
And that murder seemed very convenient. And as I said, kind of implausible that she could stab him, get back downstairs, and then know for a fact that he was going to get up and flip over the balcony.
Plus, she would have had to have known about that back staircase, which, since she didn't live in that house, and her mother didn't talk a lot about her childhood, from what I understand, I don't know how she would have known about it.
Yeah, and then the Colin thing, again, was, I guess that was based off the fact that he was taking over the book, but how did she know? And at some point she's kind of going, well, okay, I guess I can kill him in the mummy way. Mm-hmm. And then I guess I'll have to fake I guess I'm going to have to do the road thing. Mm-hmm. It seems... This is kind of getting into that part of Midsomer where they want to create the more elaborate murder mystery that it really stretches plausibility to to the extreme. They have to at least stay true to the logic of the world, and some of that just didn't make a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. I got her motivation though. She wanted, Stella was the mom that was there for her, and it's not like Diana's done such a bang up job raising Scott.
Yeah.
Cy seemed to be a real piece of crap dad.
Yeah, he was not the most supportive patriarchal figure.
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting too, is when Barnaby pointed out that the sisters do enjoy this squabbling, this fight. I kind of loved the end where they are having that sort of weird heart to heart, where Diana's basically like, you just didn't have it in you to do what I did. I'm like, does that make you a sociopath? What?
I will say, I think their depiction of the sister relationship, and this is from someone who does have 4 sisters, I thought it felt authentic. Because we do, not to the extreme that they were doing it, but we do kind of banter about and do some small little insults and digs at each other, but we love each other, and it's always going to be that way, And since my sisters will be listening to this, I just want them to know I love you and you're all perfect.
That's not what you said before the taping, but anyways. I have sisters, and I see how they are, and it is a very they nailed the sister relationship very well. I feel like the 2 actresses have probably known each other for a very long time, so it was probably a very easy dynamic to get into. What did you think? What did you think of that heart to heart at the end? Because the one thing I thought was just like when Diana said that to Stella, And Stella was like, oh, what have we been doing all these years? And not, wow, you're really terrible.
That seemed to kind of wrap it up a little too quickly, but her sister was, as far as she knew, dying because she had been stabbed and was bleeding to death. So I guess she cut her a little slack and said, yes, I guess you were the sociopathic sister and I was the nice one.
Yeah. What did you think of the sex delivery service?
I have to say, those women got awfully dressed up for their vegetable deliveries.
I kept waiting for someone to go, it's an organic vegetable.
Well, there was that scene with Jones peeking through the window and the foot up in the air.
The foot up in the air.
And it did remind me very much of the scene in The Axeman Cometh when he spies the delivery man going to Sarah's place when he realizes that Tom's daughter, Cully, was with one of their suspects and provided him with an alibi. So he handled this much better. He did not feel the need to leave town.
So let's get into the home life. It's, the home life of the Barnabys is always an important part of every Midsomer Murders. We'll get into more about Fiona Dolman in a later episode, who plays Sarah Barnaby here. But I think what I thought was most interesting here was their sort of absolute trust in each other. That Sarah brings John to the film festival knowing full well that this is his movie crush.
Yes.
Probably also on his hall pass. But I also loved that when Jones clearly had told Barnaby that she comes home and he finds that she's got the box of vegetables, and Barnaby, never for an instant, Barnaby go, like you would see it in other shows, he would go, what are you doing with Perry? Like there's not a moment's hesitation. He just doesn't, there's no mistrust. He has absolute faith in his wife that, nothing happened.
Yeah, he teases her a little bit, but it's all that. It is fully from a place of trust. And it's very much like the Tom Joyce relationship in that they are a couple that really loves each other.
Yeah.
And they trust each other, and they have their separate lives in many ways, but they are, at the core, they are good people who love each other.
Yeah. And, they do find ways to get her more into some of these mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, I think they have a nice balance. I think Fiona Dolman and Neil Dudgeon have a great chemistry together with the dog Sykes, who is adorable.
Yes.
And that little bit where does it cover his eyes?
We're going to have to do a Dogs of Midsomer special podcast at some point.
At some point. I just love that moment where he's just like, they're just joking around about it. It was like, no mistrust. It was kind of awesome.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of the detective work in this. I thought was funny. It's just the mystery is pretty much solved when he just Googles film dates.
Yeah. Yeah. It's mainly interviewing people and using the internet.
I like that he handed her the photos. Like, when was this taken? She goes, I don't know, maybe the 60s. And like on the back of it, it's the date.
But how reliable is Naughty Colin?
He's pretty reliable. He knows his stuff.
That is true. He is.
I do think we need to talk about Naughty Colin here. I honestly, watching this again, I really thought Naughty Colin had the potential to be another Dennis Rainbird. Because he's clearly having fun. He's clearly somewhat naughty, but he clearly knows some of the gossip, stealing panties.
Yeah.
He is naughty.
He is naughty. He doesn't get quite the dialogue that Dennis Rainbird had. Dennis Rainbird had some of the best dialogue in any episode.
Oh, yeah.
Line after line after line. Yeah.
I thought there was a lot of potential with Naughty Colin. And I was sad to see him go. Yeah.
Who's going to run the film festival next year?
Someone's got to set a projector for an afternoon. So want to point out that this was Jason Hughes' 50th episode. of Midsomer. They
Mhm.
celebrated it on the set, and but it was also this is the series that he says goodbye at the end of it. And I just thought he did a really, I think, like, as we talked about before, Jones did a really nice job. His reactions and sort of the Perry sex
Mhm. Yeah.
sexcapades. So I just wanted to do a nice call out to that.
Yeah, and as we mentioned in the last podcast, it's Jason uses character of Ben Jones, who gets the audience to accept John Barnaby as a replacement for Tom Barnaby, because
Yeah.
Jones is still so beloved by the fans that without him basically steering our emotions and having that initial skepticism, that I don't know that it would have worked as well as it did.
The sidekick is also always in some ways the audience surrogate.
Mm-hmm.
We are following the detective just in the same way that they are following the detective. And we are not the all-knowing, all-smart detective in the way that, Barnaby is supposed to be. We're all the Jones.
Yeah.
But Jones has always brought such heart and humor to that role, in a way where it's like he could play dumb sometimes, but in a way that was sort of endearing. And I just think he is, I think of a lot of the sidekicks. He is probably for me the one that's just the most enjoyable. And when he leaves the show, I feel like there's a giant hole that it took him a little time to fill.
Yeah. The show needed Ben Jones to come along at that time. And obviously the character has to grow and move on and become his own inspector and stuff. But the fact that we lose Jones is very sad for the audience, but it's also, I know for Jason Hughes, it was a lot of work and it took him away from his family for long periods of time. So it's a very hard role for him to do, as far as the travel involved in it and the time. So
and
we can't begrudge him that.
But he is still out there, and as we've seen, he has made a return visit, and hopefully he will. This coming season is I think is the 25th anniversary of Midsomer, so maybe he will make a return visit there. Maybe we'll get those Rainbirds back.
Unfortunately, not Iris, as the actress has passed away.
Oh well.
Yeah. Well, I just want to also say that Jones, for me, ties this episode very much together with the X-Man Cometh, because for the way I see it, this is the John version of that, as it was to Tom. It's the fanboy reaction that Tom had with Hired Gun and Jack the Axeman McKinley. John is having with Stella Harris and with Diana Davenport. You see that the first time he goes to interview them. And it doesn't start to wear away at all until that great scene where he's interviewing both of them at the police station, and they really gang up on him. And when he says, "I'm not done yet," and basically they both say, "Yeah, you are." I mean,
they did a diva turn.
Yeah. And Jones is, again, he's the skeptic here, as he was with the Axeman. And as we discussed, we think he figured that out much more quickly than did Tom Barnaby. I don't know if he figures this out, but he's also very skeptical of him, because Jones makes sure to mention that they can't rule anyone out. Can we, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. For my take, I didn't see John as starstruck as Tom was. It's not like he's pulling out old film scripts and I'm like, Stella, can we just do this line from the Mummy movie?
He does not ask for an autograph, and he doesn't jam with them, at least.
Yeah, but he is a little bit more of the. I think you're right. He is a little bit more of the. Oh, this is someone I have a crush on. But
yeah,
it's. That is scene where they're interrogated at the end, and they're just like, we're leaving, and he's like, bye. They were a force.
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of brings it to our final thoughts. Is I think this episode I think if you look at sort of the mystery, it's funny. It's got some weird kills, not like the really outstanding kills of some episodes, but there's some pretty good crazy kills. But I think, it's that double act of Harriet Walters and Sinead Cusack that they are the engine that keeps this locomotive going this episode.
It really does rely on them as actresses and their chemistry with each other to really sell the episode. It's a fine mystery. I love the Hammer Films aspect of it because I think that really ties in that unique aspect of British film history and brings it into Midsomer. But without those two in those roles, I don't know if it would be as successful as it is.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think that's everything we wanted to talk about the Death and the Divas. We want to thank everyone for listening to us. If you had anything you wanted to discuss about this particular episode, Death and the Divas, or any episode of Midsomer Murders, or just anything about Midsomer Murders at all, feel free to email us at welcometomidsomer@gmail.com. We are also Welcome to Midsomer on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing to us or rating and reviewing us on iTunes or whatever podcast app you use. It just helps people find us, tell all your friends about us, get your friends hooked on Midsomer. We're going to be back next month to talk about another episode, and we hope you will join us again for that. And as we take the road out of Midsomer, we want to thank you for listening and remind you that in Midsomer Langley, old movies can be murder.
And usually are.
Welcome to Midsomer is produced by Eric Buscher and Eileen Becker. All clips in this podcast are used in compliance with the U.S. Copyrights Act Fair Use Exemption for criticism and commentary. Our logo and podcast art was designed by Smeedrai. Our theme music is by the infamous Space.